All right, today we're talking about sampling, and that's a very common thing that we have to do in statistics. That's where we get all of our numbers. Typically, when we are running those numbers to figure out our averages and those things. So, in statistics, a population is a set of all the things or people of interest in a study. We consider each thing or person in the population a member of the population. Sometimes populations are extremely large, so it is common for only part of the population, called a sample, to be obtained to obtain information about the population. Okay, so there's different types of samples that we can gather. There's a random sample, a systematic sample, a stratified sample, a cluster sample, and a convenience sample. A random sample is that every person or thing in the sample is equally likely to be selected. Okay, a random sample is typically the one that we would like to choose if we can, because it's most likely to be representative of the overall larger population. A systematic sample, the members of these in the population are listed like in order, and then we say, okay, we're going to pick every fourth member of this. So we're going to kind of systematically list it. Maybe we put everybody in alphabetical order, and then we pick the fourth person until we have the number of people that we want to survey. A stratified sample, this is where the population is divided into groups, with each group made up of members that share some particular characteristics. So maybe we want to have a sampling of teachers. So we put a group of teachers together, and then a fixed number of members from each group are randomly selected. So maybe we have teachers and doctors and lawyers, and then from each of those groups, we need 10 people. A cluster sample, the population is divided into groups that tend to naturally exist, such as a city or a state. All members of some randomly chosen group are selected for the sample. And a convenience sample, this is often used, especially like if you're at school and you're like, hey, I wonder, what kids like a lunch, and you just randomly sample some kids at school because they're there. So a convenience sample is a member of the populations that are easily accessible and are selected for the sample. No consideration is made for selecting randomly at the point during the selection process. Okay, so we have talked about the fact that one of the main uses for statistics is to help make good decisions. Making decisions about particular characteristics of groups of individuals is done all of the time. We hear political polls all the time and statistics and stuff in the news. So we infer something. We use evidence and reasoning to make a conclusion. We often use information about a small group to make inferences about a larger group. We call the small group a sample. We call the entire group the population. If we have the number that summarizes the population, we call that a parameter. And if we have a number that summarizes a sample, we call that a statistics. And then we use a statistic from a sample to make inferences about a population parameter. Okay, so we need to be very careful when using a sample to make an inference about a population. Most importantly, the sample needs to be representative of the population. So if the sample is not representative of the population, then any conclusion that we draw from the sample will not be reliable. A sample that does not represent the population is called a biased sample. Okay, this happens all the time. No matter how careful we are, we have to take into consideration that there may be some sample bias. Okay, a biased sample favors one part of the population over another, which is why the results can't always be 100% accurate unless you sample everybody. It's not going to represent the entire population. Okay, so there are two main ways that we can make sure a sample is representation of the entire population. We can choose at random, so a random sample is best. meaning it's totally by chance. A random sample is more likely to be representative of the population than one chosen out of convenience. And we can choose a large sample. The larger the sample, the more likely it is to represent the population. Let's say we have a population of 1 million people. If we only sample 10 of those million people, that's not a very accurate. But if maybe out of that million we sampled 100,000, that might be a little bit better of a size. Okay, both of these steps reduce the risk of making it biased. So despite all of our best efforts, our sample will almost never exactly match the population. There will always be some error. Just because there is some error doesn't mean that we did anything wrong. It's just the nature of things. So this type of error is just part of the sampling process. It can be reduced, but not eliminated. Okay, so we can take steps to make sure that when we're doing statistics, that we're getting numbers that are going to be as useful as possible. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at some examples and determining what type of sample is used. Okay, a facility supervisor at a sports stadium wants to rate the condition of the seats at the stadium. Which of the following best describes a stratified sample of seats? Okay, so let's go back and look at our definition of stratified. So stratified sample, it says the population is divided into groups, with each group made up of a member that shares some particular characteristics, such as population. Then a fixed number of members, but not all members, from each group are randomly selected for the sample. Okay, so it says all seats in the VIP section are easily accessible, so the supervisor selects 60 of those seats in the section. That sounds like convenience to me. Okay, the supervisor makes a list of the seats and selects every 6 seat until 60 seats are selected. The supervisor forms 5 groups of seats based on the dates the seats were last replaced, and then she selects 12 seats at random. Okay, so she grouped things together and then split them up. So that would be stratified. All right, the host on the cruise ship wants to collect data on the time passengers spent at various activities on board. Which of the following data best describes a convenience sample of the passengers? Okay, the host selects the first 78 passengers who board because these passengers are easily accessible. Easily accessible is all about convenience, so that would be convenience. All right, a manager wants to poll residents about a park renovation. Which of the following best describes a cluster sample? Okay, so cluster sample is the population is divided into groups that tend to naturally exist, and then all members of some random group are chosen. Okay. So the city manager forms 7 groups of residents based on the residents' incomes. Then she selects 7 or 8 residents in each group. That would be stratified. Let's see. The city manager makes a list of residents and then selects every 7th. And the manager forms groups of 8 residents based on the streets where they live and then selects. It would be that one. All right, sample 2. Susan wants to find the average height of students in the 10th grade at East High School. So she will use the sample of students in the 10th grade to find the average height. So answer the questions below. Which units could be used for the units of measurement? Okay, so we're looking at height. So height could be inches. It could be feet. Pounds, that's weight. Kilograms, that's weight. Centimeters is height. Okay, which of the procedures below would be the best way to find the average heights? So measure the heights of 5 volunteers. That would be very convenient. Ask for 44 volunteers from the 10th grade to state their own heights. That might not be super accurate. Randomly pick 5 students from the 10th grade and have them state their own heights, or randomly pick 44 students from the 10th grade and measure their heights. That would definitely give you the most accurate results. Okay. Town officials want to estimate the number of households that own a dog. Answer the following questions. Which of the following surveys probably would best represent the entire population of households? 50 households are randomly selected from the town, 16 own dogs. 50 households within a mile of the park are randomly selected, 24 own a dog, or 50 households with a garage are randomly selected. Just randomly selected from the town would be best to represent the town. Okay, there were 750 households in the town. Using your answer from part A, estimate the number of households that own a dog. So this is a proportional question, right? So if 50 were surveyed out of the 750 that exist, 16 own dogs, how many out of the total would we expect to own a dog? So we're going to cross multiply. We get 50x equals 12,000. Divide by 50, and x is 240. So 240 households we would expect to have dogs. Okay. Lincoln High wants to estimate the number of students who drive to school. Which of the following surveys would best represent the entire student population? 25 students randomly selected from the Glee Club to drive to school. 25 students are randomly selected from the 12th grade for drive to school. And 25 are randomly selected from the school 3 drive. Well, again, less specific from the whole school. We're trying to represent the whole school, so we would want to randomly select from the whole school. There are 1,250 students at Lincoln High. Use your answer to estimate. Okay, so 25 out of our survey, out of our total population, 3 drive to school. How many would drive to school using that? Estimation. So we would have 25x equals 3750. So x is 150. Okay. Mr. Coleman is a librarian at Central Library. In examining a random sample of the library's books collection, he found the following. 829 books had no damage, 70 books had minor damage, and 28 books had major damage. So based on this sample, how many of the 75,500 books in the collection should Mr. Coleman expect to have major damage? Round your answer to the nearest whole number. Do not round any intermediate calculations. Okay. So first we have to figure out how many books he sampled. So 829 plus 70 plus 28. So he sampled 927 books. And he found that 28 of the 927 had pretty good damage, right? Had major damage. So he would expect how many of that big whole population to have that much damage. So we're going to cross multiply. Sorry, my dogs are about to burst outside, so it's going to get loud. So x is 2280.